PlayStation's multiplayer strategy just isn't working. Let's talk about it. PlayStation, console manufacturer and famed publisher of games like God of War, Spider-Man, and Robot MLK Simulator, announced over a year ago that their upcoming game slate is going to give us what we love the most from them: multiplayer live service games. To be exact, PlayStation said they're launching 12 live service games by 2025, which seems like a lot, but if you really think about it, if they let Insomniac develop them, they'll have double that number out by next year. And to be honest, I can't joke about this too much because from the get-go, I've been personally excited about the idea. Think about it. The Last of Us Factions and Ghost of Tsushima Legends were just modes in their respective games, and they were excellent. PlayStation can have their single-player success while also opening up more audiences to their biggest franchises, where it fits. For example, Horizon's Monster Combat is so good with a variety of large machines to take on, an assortment of weapons and abilities, and a really cool world to tie it all together. A spin-off Monster Hunter style game in the Horizon world feels like a natural fit. Or you bust out the big guns. It's time to bring back Knack in Battle Royale fashion. Sony is of course no stranger to multiplayer. During the PS3 generation, we saw games like Resistance, Killzone, God of War Ascension for some reason, and MAG, which arguably might have been a bit too multiplayer. But modern day Sony is a different breed. PlayStation Studios is a development family made up of carefully constructed teams that make prestige projects, namely single-player third-person action games, with some exceptions like Gran Turismo and MLB The Show. 12 live service games by 2025 is a big shift from PlayStation's prestige single-player vision. So let's get into the promise, the potential, and ultimately what could be the pitfall of PlayStation's multiplayer plan. So we've already talked a bit about the promise. 12 live service games capitalizing on PlayStation's roster of IP, which includes a bunch of franchises we love like Spider-Man and Loco Roco. You'd also expect new IP to expand the portfolio. So what are these 12 live service games PlayStation is making? Are we gonna get 12 Destinies? Maybe split it even between 6 Destinies and 6 Fortnites? Well, no. We actually don't really need to ask the question about what these games are because they're not a secret. You can take a look at PlayStation's recent announcements, acquisitions, and job postings and nail down what the majority of the 12 games are. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. Obviously, we have the Last of Us multiplayer game from Naughty Dog, Fair Games, a PvP heist game from Haven Studios, Concord, a PvP multiplayer FPS from Firewalk Studios, Marathon, a PvP extraction shooter from Bungie, and Helldivers 2, a co-op shooter from Arrowhead Studios. We know that Deviation Studios is working on a new FPS IP with PlayStation, which they announced at Summer Game Fest 2 years ago. We also know that London Studios is working on an online co-op game set in a fantasy London. Guerrilla confirmed they're working on an online Horizon game. And then there's MLB The Show, which I know isn't exciting in this conversation, but PlayStation did refer to it as a live service game, and so it counts toward this number. A Twisted Metal reboot is reported to be in development over at PlayStation's Firesprite studio. Sucker Punch and Insomniac have both been hiring for multiplayer projects. Firewall Ultra, PlayStation's upcoming VR shooter, could fit the bill, or maybe PlayStation's counting each yearly release of MLB separately. It's hard to gauge. What we do have is a pretty clear picture of PlayStation's live service promise, which is where we get into the potential. So an important question to ask while talking about all of this is, what does live service mean? Well, according to these slides from PlayStation, it simply means not single player. And according to comments from Jim Ryan, they're huge money bags delivered right to PlayStation's front door. They're games meant to keep the audience in for extended periods of time, with expansions, battle passes, and content drops. And as capitalistic and grubby as that sounds, there's a high chance that one of your favorite games is one. Destiny is a pioneer of live service, and Destiny fans are basically the K-pop fans of video games. In fact, Kate 6 is my bias. So it makes sense that PlayStation would purchase Bungie, partly for the value of Destiny, but furthermore, to have experts in the room for this live service transition. This makes sense. One of the things that works really well about PlayStation Studios is collaboration. For example, Guerrilla Games shared the Decima engine with Kojima Productions for Death Stranding. Last of Us 2 and Ghost of Tsushima shared Horse Tech, and Knack and Sackboy share a living space under Astrobot's shadow. Bungie is a huge asset to have. They understand multiplayer gameplay, they understand post-launch content and expansions, having both failed and succeeded in that regard, and they understand creating a living, breathing experience of a video game. So having Bungie talk to Naughty Dog, Firewalk, Haven, Guerrilla, and all of these studios working on live games is only going to strengthen the potential of this live service initiative. What can possibly go wrong? As it turns out, a lot can go wrong. Jason Schreier's sources say that the Last of Us multiplayer game has been scaled down, prompting this statement from Naughty Dog that the game has been delayed. Last of Us multiplayer was effectively announced in 2019 with an update last year at Summer Game Fest and a promise of new info this year. Its seemingly turbulent development can mean a lot of things. Maybe its ambition and scope was too large. Maybe Naughty Dog, a developer typically known for its extremely polished single-player experiences, is struggling making an equally polished online game. Maybe the commitment to a live service with the promise of ongoing post-launch content is a demanding task for even the most talented studios. And if any of this is true, maybe that doesn't bode well for PlayStation's multiplayer pursuits. According to Jim Ryan, Bungie is heavily involved in a rigorous portfolio review process where they evaluate the live service games and give feedback on their viability. And according to Jason Schreier, Bungie raised questions about the Last of Us multiplayer game and its ability to keep players engaged. And so it's been reassessed, which is good because if The Last of Us multiplayer ended up being another Redfall, I'd literally turn into The Last of Us Part 2 version of Ellie. But at the same time, it sucks because The Last of Us isn't the only PlayStation multiplayer game having trouble. Remember Deviation Games, that studio working with PlayStation on a new FPS IP? Well, it's been reported that they've suffered heavy layoffs, up to 90 members of staff, which is crazy because when they announced their partnership, they were over 100 strong. I'm not good at math, but 100 minus 90 equals I'm pretty sure that game is never going to come out. The company has also closed down Pixel Opus, the small creative studio behind Concrete Genie, and has ended support on Media Molecule's Dreams. And you can understand how that makes sense when these are the less lucrative elements of PlayStation's first party. But it does become a bit concerning when right after news of these closures, PlayStation comes out and states that by 2025, 60% of their investment will be in live services. 60%! If I told you 60% of my money was going to live service games, you'd think I was Snowbike Mike. And that 60% is in the midst of The Last of Us being scaled down, Deviation layoffs, and a PlayStation showcase focused on live service games that didn't impress the audience. Fair Games, Concord, Marathon, and Helldivers 2 felt like the MCU shows on Disney+. Like, sure, they're technically PlayStation Studios games, but something feels off. Between purely CGI trailers, barren info on new IP, and an absence of what the potential of live service could mean for our favorite PlayStation franchises, we were left with not only a bad first impression, but a potential feeling of doom and gloom. We're in an age of live service where we're seeing games sink or swim in a harsh, competitive environment. Not only are games like Marvel's Avengers shutting down, but fan favorites like Knockout City, Rumbleverse, Back 4 Blood, and more are either shutting down or ending content development. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the big ones is the fact that space is running out for new live services. And the bandwidth that the player base has to check out the growing list of live service games and invest a high amount of time and cash is growing thinner by the year, which is why phenomenal games like Knockout City have struggled to stay relevant. It's also why this part in this slide from Sony is scary, because execs look at this and see numbers, but the story behind these numbers involves a lot of failed projects, a lot of investment, and a lot of turnover. I freaking loved Last of Us Factions mode from the original game. I think Ghost of Tsushima Legends is one of the most underrated modes of last gen. There's nothing I want more than for PlayStation's multiplayer strategy to work. Not just for the money, but for the brilliant games that can come from it. But for this to work, we need to slow down a bit. You can't treat this like a sprint, especially if you want games like Marathon to be good. I know the money in live services is very attractive right now, but PlayStation, more than EA, more than Ubisoft, more than any other publisher, has the most to lose if it's not done right. So let's pump the brakes, because whatever's going on right now with all of this just isn't working.